After a few entries that left fans extremely divisive, Resident Evil 7 felt like a perfect revival of survival horror in the franchise. The game presented new characters, environments, and a story that was mostly disconnected from the games that preceded it, almost like a soft reboot, and it was incredible. It brought to life this Louisiana grunge horror house, putting you in the shoes of a guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. And love it or hate it, I think it gave us some of the most unforgettable antagonists and set pieces of the past decade. RE7 turned out to be one of the best releases of 2017 in a year full to the brim of great games, and it left me extremely excited for what was next. Resident Evil 8, or Resident Evil Village, is not great. In fact, it brings back a host of issues the franchise found itself avoiding with 7. It's by no means a bad game, plenty of people loved it and it received critical acclaim, but as a fan, well, there's a lot here I could have gone without. As this game is a direct follow-up to Resident Evil 7, I will be comparing these two games a lot. And before you come at me like an angry mob, just hear me out. If you loved RE8, then that's great. I don't want to ruin that experience for you. Just know going in that I do not hate this game. I went in really looking for a good time, and while I tried to judge this game on its own, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just wrong here. Let's start with the story. Village's story is not great. You play as Ethan Winters, a man who wants to save his wife and daughter. I really wish I had more to say about him, but we'll get to that. Your wife gets shot in the dick and your daughter gets stolen by Chris motherfucking Redfield. Now it's your job to enter the Resident Evil Village and put an end to the supernatural entities ruling it to find your family. Resident Evil is no stranger to cheesy or bad dialogue.
I've been thinking something is wrong with this house.
Right.
Hey, what is this? There's a page missing.
But this game is full of it.
Package secure, sir.
Take him away.
I said get your hands off her!
Ethan, no.
Especially with our protagonist, Ethan. Ethan Winters has to be one of the most generic and annoying protagonists I've had to share time with in recent memory. By no means was Ethan interesting in the first game, but he almost never spoke, so his overall blandness wasn't that offensive. But in this installment, he's like a fucking chatterbox. Seriously, whether it's asking the same questions that the player is already thinking, shouting some great exclamation about whatever he's seeing, or talking about how much he loves his family, he got on my nerves a lot in this game.
I don't give a damn about your personal issues. I just want to fix my daughter.
He's always trying to put in his 2 cents despite not having anything to say besides the shittiest one-liners you've ever heard in your life.
And death as he was in life. Disgusting.
Ethan works as a blank slate for RE7 because they never tried very hard to flesh him out. He's a vehicle for the player to immerse themselves in the spooky haunted house, and the few times he does speak, it's typically not that bad.
You're not listening to me. There are crazy people in this house trying to fucking kill me.
He isn't the only lacking character though. With the exception of 1 or 2 characters, I found RE8's cast very forgettable. The 4 lords of the Resident Evil Village all serve as the boss battles before the central antagonist, Mother Miranda. Each of them have their own section of the map with a certain horror theme. Vampires, industrial body horror, babies. But not all lords are created equal. Half of these guys feel extremely half-baked, mostly due to the game not giving villain enough time. Each section only lasts about 2 or 3 hours at most, which is criminal because each of these guys could have been staples of the series. The only antagonists I found really interesting were Lady D and Heisenberg, but mostly Lady D. Lady Dimitrescu was heavily portrayed in the marketing as one of the core villains of the game, but her section ends about 2 to 3 hours in. That's a real shame because she was one of the game's best parts. Although I do think this game relies way too heavily on a linear progression, her castle is the most traditional Resident Evil section throughout the game. She's pretty menacing, and watching her lose her composure as you take out her daughters is a really neat touch that makes her repeatedly interesting to interact with. This is especially a bummer because the real main antagonist we got is Mother Miranda, one of the worst video game antagonists I've ever seen. That sounds hyperbolic, but I'm being completely serious. Miranda fucking sucks. She's important for story reasons, but as an actual villain, Miranda is a character with almost no presence in the story, and if characters weren't constantly name-dropping her, I'd probably have forgotten her. She shows up like twice at the start of the game and then at the end, 11 to 12 hours into your playthrough. You have a decent boss fight with her and then it's over. What a joke. I know a majority of the discussion around Lady D involves her massive Lady Double Ds, but I seriously think she would have fit the role of main antagonist. She's genuinely pretty interesting with character quirks and things to lose that change how she acts. She forms a personal relationship with Ethan as you progress through her castle. She's an actual fucking character with personality and qualities that make her likable versus Miranda, who's the most boring, stupid piece of shit ever. Well, at least the gameplay's good, right? Right? Okay, Village does provide some significant improvements to the way combat worked in RE7, but there are still problems with the new additions. The new enemies? Perfect. Absolutely wonderful. I still could have gone with a few new additions, but compared to RE7's Goop Monster roster, I'll take anything. Except her. There's a handful of new weapons to try and play around with. You can now shove enemies away with some proper timing, and this game is generally faster with more of an emphasis on combat. The Merchant also makes a return from RE4. The Duke sells you weapons, ammo, and upgrades for your weapons with money you get off of enemies. These additions make combat more fleshed out, but in this case, I think less is more. Okay, now that I'm literally complaining about improvements to the formula, I feel I should explain myself. Resident Evil is traditionally defined by its clunky, obtuse combat that confines you in narrow spaces so you're forced to confront enemies and battle with a limited inventory space. You're given very little ammo, so when you do come face to face with enemies, you have to make a lot of decisions about what to do. Do I spend precious ammo here and risk not having it later? Or do I try to run around these enemies in this hallway that's tighter fit than Lady D's dress? This kind of gameplay requires decision making and agency. Resident Evil Village does not. If you are even decently good at video games, you will have more than enough ammo you will ever really need in this game. Inventory management is also not really a thing here. Okay, it's technically a feature, but it's never anything substantial. You can buy upgrades to your inventory size like in the previous games, but it's so big that not once, and I mean not once in my 12-hour playthrough did I ever feel like I couldn't bring along everything I found. Even worse, key items to progress the story don't take up inventory space like they do in the previous games. This game really just loves to remove any player choice, huh? Gone are the days of wondering what I should bring along with me, because the game just fucking does it for me. You will attain so much money and so many resources that aside from maybe once or twice in my playthrough that I really felt in danger because of it. Having a merchant in this game really ruins any sort of tension that could have been had. While Duke is my favorite character in the game and I wouldn't trade him for anything, having a merchant provides you much sought after resources and helps you upgrade your guns, which ends up making you feel like a powerhouse instead of a guy going through a rough day. And just a minor nitpick, I felt a lot of the enemy encounters in this game were not really up to snuff. A lot of them require you to run around objects in the environment to dodge their attacks, which just isn't that interesting. Like, wow, Lady D, you're so terrifying, let me run around this thing really quick, You see what I mean? All of this leads to a serious lack of tension in a game that markets itself front and foremost as survival horror. Which leads into probably my biggest issue with the game. It's not scary. You could argue RE7 was not that scary, but it seriously attempted to emulate the feeling presented by iconic horror films such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Evil Dead series. For at least the first third of RE7, the game is putting you through a multitude of increasingly repulsive and grotesque scenarios through the eyes of Ethan. The game wasn't just scary through set pieces either. The gameplay and environment heavily reinforced the fact that you were stuck in the wrong place at the wrong time, using minimal ammo and rundown weapons you would just happen to come upon to enforce the feeling of helplessness. Maybe it wasn't pee your pants scary, but it was definitely creepy. Resident Evil 8 is not scary. Listen, I'm not that dumb. I know Capcom was heavily trying to resemble what made RE4 special. The comparisons are pretty blatant, from the European village setting, the focus on action, the merchant, key items not taking inventory space, etc. It's not a bad idea to take a look back at successful titles in the series to try and replicate what made those games special. But does it work here? Sure, but while RE4 feels like it's indulgent in its own absurdity, Village feels like it's trying to tell this serious, emotional narrative while also putting you in batshit crazy scenarios. I don't know, it doesn't really mesh well for me personally. Now, Ethan has military training, and now you can upgrade and shoot your powerful weapons with all the ammo you could ever need, making you feel much less vulnerable and helpless than the previous entry. It's a perfectly competent first-person action game with a horror theme, but a survival horror?
No thanks, bro.
This game being less scary is actually something I can prove. Producer Tsuyoshi Kanda stated in an interview that RE7 was too scary to play, and they wanted to create an experience anyone could jump in. Now, this makes a lot of sense. Making your game more accessible is completely fine. Why put the effort in to make a great game that nobody can play? That being said, was it really worth sacrificing a majority of the mechanics that helped define and reboot the series? I would argue no. You could say I went into this game with differing expectations than what the game really was, and that's a completely fair and true statement to make. After loving 7, I really wanted Resident Evil Village to fix my issues with 7 and surpass it to greater heights. From an accessibility standpoint, I guess it did. It feels kind of jarring to see so many people I know be engaged with this series. It's oddly satisfying. Overall, Village is fine. It's a good entry into the series that progresses the lore pretty heavily and offers some entertaining set pieces. I liked a few of the enemies, the gunplay was mostly fine, and the graphics were even better than 7, which is to be expected. But the shift in focus to action does leave me a bit scared. The series' downfall all began with its focus on action blockbuster experiences. And while RE6 is like the best-selling game in the series, it is widely considered by fans to be one of the worst. The scariest part about this game ended up being what it may do to the franchise overall. Hey, you fucking guys! I hope you enjoyed the video. I put a lot of work into it just now. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a like. It helps me a lot. And maybe comment about what you thought about this game or this video, if I was being too biased, if I wasn't being biased enough. Come on, share your thoughts below. Come on. As you may know, I was going to stream this game, but the night I recorded and uploaded that last video, I suffered a work injury where I burned my arm in a grease fire, so that was fun. I was in no condition to work, let alone stream on Twitch, so I played the game solo. That being said, I do plan on streaming soon, and my next video I have in the works. I wouldn't say to expect it for another week or two, but you guys know my schedule, I'm extremely inconsistent. Also, if you want to participate in the Q&A, go comment on the last video. Bye.